President Biden did issue an executive order this past week. It authorizes US officials to deport large numbers of migrants without processing asylum claims until the border crossings number dips below 1,500. So it's essentially suspending some of the asylum processing. Trump's been perceived as stronger on the border. Does this change anything?
No, Trump still is. More people think that Donald Trump's policies would stop or slow border crossings more than Biden.
As economic conditions for most Americans continue to deteriorate with ongoing inflation and a housing crisis that grows month by month, a new poll by CBS News finds that the majority of Americans are now in favor of deporting all undocumented immigrants, which, to be clear, would actually be a complete and utter disaster for our economy. But here's more.
We have a lot of the campaign rhetoric speaking of what people say they would do. You've seen the Trump campaign talking about mass deportations. We tested that in a general way in principle. Would you support a new government program that would deport all people living in the US illegally? And that finds majority favor. That finds 6 in 10. It's strongest among folks who are MAGA. It's strongest among Trump supporters, but also from some Democrats as well. And I think that that speaks to the general idea, not just that people see the border as a crisis, but also where we are in the campaign, where a lot of very dramatic or new proposals out there are finding favor here. We tested even the idea of should local law enforcement be involved in this, and a lot of folks do say yes.
All right, so let's actually get a little more specific about the latest CBS News YouGov poll and what these results indicate. So let's put up this graphic because it shows you that when it comes to Biden's executive order on migrants crossing the border, a whopping 70% of registered voters say that they approve of that executive order. Only 30% disapprove. And I gotta be honest, that is a change from the polling that we saw back in 2015, 2016, when Donald Trump was running for president the first time, and he had made some, pretty horrible statements about immigrants, about Mexicans crossing the border, calling them, criminals and all sorts of, derogatory phrasing that was used. But now all of a sudden there is a change, and I do think that economic conditions have something to do with it. I also think that some of the political maneuvering by Republican lawmakers in various states has something to do with it as well. And look, while progressives are not happy with Biden's executive order, clearly Biden was doing something that the majority of voters, at least based on this poll, did want. Now, Biden's order allows US immigration officials to quickly reject and deport migrants without processing their asylum claims if they come through the border without going through a legal port of entry. So the order will be triggered when the average number of daily crossings exceeds 2,500 people. But keep in mind that Biden's executive order is the same policy that Donald Trump tried to implement through an executive order back in 2018, and the court struck that down. So it's very likely that this order by Biden will be struck down as well. And to be clear, the ACLU has already indicated that they plan to challenge the Biden administration on this. So immigration policy through executive order is actually the worst way to implement policy because it is incredibly vulnerable to the courts. With that said, let's go to the next graphic that shows that 62% of registered voters say that they would be in favor of a program to deport all undocumented immigrants. Only 38% oppose.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
Now, I don't think most people understand how incredibly critical undocumented immigrants are to our economy. And there are downsides to that for the undocumented workers because oftentimes their undocumented status gets used and abused by employers. But these are individuals who do incredibly important jobs in our country, and just deporting everyone without really having a real plan in place for a pathway to citizenship, I think would be a disaster. And as you heard earlier, the findings also indicate that the majority of the public want local law enforcement to be involved in the immigration enforcement process. They want them to cooperate with federal officials when it comes to deportations. And that is not the case currently at various sanctuary states or sanctuary cities. So the changing sentiment toward migrants probably has a lot to do with ongoing economic anxiety that Americans have been feeling. I keep saying this because I really do think it's true. And I do think that that's also coupled with the fact that a lot more people have entered the country under Biden versus previous administrations. So let's take a look at this next graphic, because if you see what it's communicating, it goes back to 2014 when Obama was still president. And throughout 2014 through 2020, southern border encounters were actually relatively low to what we experienced under the Biden administration. So when you hear, some of the rhetoric on the right about how Biden has this open border policy, it's not really an open border policy, but it is true that the already broken immigration system was something that migrants decided to take advantage of, right? There are loopholes, and if you are an asylum seeker, or at least you're a migrant who claims you're seeking asylum, but you're really trying to get in for economic purposes, well, you can make your asylum claim. We don't have enough judges to quickly process the asylum claims, and so individuals are allowed into the country, and it'll be about 6 years on average before they get their asylum claim heard and adjudicated by an immigration judge. And so it's a loophole that people are taking advantage of. And in response to that, rather than passing comprehensive immigration reform that includes a pathway to citizenship for people who should be here, you have Biden now implementing this executive order. But I want to go to what I said earlier about the economic reasons. So something changed under Biden, and it was due to some political maneuvering by conservative politicians in various red states like Texas. Now, Texas Governor Greg Abbott started busing and flying migrants into blue cities. And all of a sudden, you have Democratic voters getting confronted with a policy issue, really, that border towns have been dealing with forever in this country. And it kind of woke them up, and it also enraged them. I've shown some of these videos before, but I think Chicago is a really good example of what typically Democratic voters are now experiencing and are not happy with. Let's take a look.
Listen to these folks in Chicago.
Reality is, it's gotta say no, because that's the simple solution is no. Turn the buses around.
We come in a community of black people where we already get the low scraps. And then you want to take the little scrap, the resources that we have, and put us at the bottom of the barrel.
Now, Waz, that's a Fox News report on what's been going on in Chicago. I've been watching, their city council meetings and listening to what people in the local community have to say about what's going on. The reason why we're showing you a Fox News video is because liberal media is not going to cover that. Okay, it's just the fact of the matter, but it's important for you to be informed about what's actually happening on the ground in cities like Chicago. And so I think the economic component of this is huge. I really do think that's the main driver of the frustration that even Democratic voters are feeling right now.
Yeah, obviously, and that just so listeners understand, I think when I first became a bit of a political dork or junkie or whatever you want to call it, I think I definitely had an arrogant sort of, the general population certainly isn't paying close enough attention to what's going on to have an informed opinion. And I've actually come around on that and think that the average voter is pretty savvy and does have a pretty good handle on what's going on. I think what you're seeing in that video in Chicago is a question of resources and infrastructure. Obviously, that city does not have the infrastructure or the resources to competently deal with an influx of new people. That's just true. Right. People aren't idiots for noticing that. They're not raging foaming at the mouth bigots for noticing that the resources are scarce and the people who have a skin in the game, meaning people who have been invested in those places and are rooted in those places, feel like they should have ownership on first dibs on the resources that are available. I'd like, that doesn't seem strange to me. Another thing that, I think that poll is indicative of, right? And I've thought this for a while, that the Democrats basically don't know what they're doing on immigration. Like, they don't have a policy. Like, Anna, me and you are people that pay close attention to this stuff. Could you articulate what the Democratic Party's official stance on immigration is? No. You know what the Republican stance is? We don't want them.
Yes,
we want them out. Look, that might be callous, and I vehemently disagree with that. But it's a position that everybody understands that they hold. It's very easy to, it's legible. The Democratic Party's position on immigration is not. It's all over the place. And the hypocrisy of Biden going to basically the exact same Trump executive order on immigration after, oh my God, CNN and MSNBC with the babies in the cages and this and that. Like, it was a whole thing about how racist and crazy Donald Trump was for some of his posture towards immigration. And now to watch them do this, I think people understand that they have no logic. There's no logic to their immigration policy. And the cities that, again, most populated, obviously there's a fierce competition for the available resources. Of course, people are gonna notice that these new people, like, if money is going towards situating these brand new people in communities with people that are deeply rooted, they're going to have a problem with it. It's not a racist or xenophobic or whatever. It's just a normal human context. And the last thing that I'll say about this, and I think the main reason why I think this is a loser for the Democrats is that these people coming from Central America are coming from countries that are unlivable, damn near, that have been decimated, and are the direct result of American policy. We created those environments, the State Department, the CIA, you name it. They got their fingerprints all over the disruption of all of those countries. Like, these people aren't thirsty to just come to America for nothing. The situation on the ground in their country, because we want to be the global empire and the enforcer, and we want to dictate terms to everybody, even if it means destabilizing a place that empowers people or a person who has beliefs, political or whatever, that aren't congruent with whatever American policy is at the time. Yeah, that's why those people are coming, and that's why I feel strongly about this idea that, like, ruining their countries and then turning them away at the border, like, that feels like a ridiculous level of cruelty. But Joe Biden cannot go out and make the case that the State Department and our foreign policy is ruining people's lives abroad. He can't make that case.
As the State Department is currently in the process of doing so right now as we speak, right? I mean, it is so true. You make such a great point, Waz. And I do think that the failure of the Democrats and the Biden administration on this issue is multifaceted, right? Because it's not just foreign policy, it's not just the conditions on the ground in those countries due to American foreign policy. The frustration that American voters are feeling also has to do with the fact that we have had this ongoing housing crisis for how long? For how long? People can't afford rent, people can't afford a home to buy. I mean, that is ludicrous to even consider at this point for the vast majority of American workers. And so when they see that the government is doing nothing for them on these very basic things like housing, for instance, while simultaneously providing resources for migrants coming in seeking asylum, yeah, it kind of pits people against one another, and it also leads to increased frustration with the current administration. And so I just think the Biden administration and Democrats overall think that they can get away with neglecting the biggest issues that Americans have been complaining about, but they can't get away with it. They can't just point at Trump and say, oh, Trump bad, he bad convicted felon. You can't vote for convicted felon, you must vote for us. But most people don't care about Trump's convicted felon status when they're too busy feeling anxiety over whether they're gonna be able to afford everything they need at the grocery store. Okay, the inflation is crushing them. The housing is crushing them. Again, it is a multifaceted failure by the Democrats who purport to care so much about working people, who used to at least provide policies, to your point, that were real solutions. The only thing Biden did is he came in and he reversed some of Trump's policies that were actually, in hindsight, not bad. Like the one thing that Trump did, now that I think about it, that was actually kind of helpful when it comes to immigration is, I don't know how he did it, but he convinced Mexico to agree to have asylum seekers stay there until their asylum claims are heard by judges in the United States. And then once their case is adjudicated, they either get to come into the United States or they have to go back home. But now you have an influx of migrants coming in the middle of a housing crisis, in the middle of this inflationary period. And yeah, it's going to impact Democrats in the polls. It's going to impact Biden in the polls. I just think he's been asleep this entire time and thought he could get away with it just by fear mongering about Trump. And that's the frustrating thing about this. And I agree with you, Waz. We need to have an actual plan, an actual solution. The only thing we've heard from Democrats over the last 8 years is we don't like what Trump is doing, so we're gonna reverse it. Okay, that's great that you don't like what Trump is doing. What is your solution? And they've got nothing. So that is the reason why you have Biden cowering his head, begging Trump to help him pass immigration reform in the Senate. That's what happened. And that's not a leader, that's an embarrassment.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us, become a young Turk.